You know, Dragon Quest is a lot like fast food. It always tastes the same, and you always get slime. Welcome to Triple Click, where we bring the games to you. This week we are talking about Dragon Quest VII Reimagined and the larger Dragon Quest series. Is it cool? Is it bad? Let's discuss. I'm Jason Schreier.
I'm Kirk Hamilton.
And I'm Maddy Myers.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Welcome to February.
We made it.
Welcome to February.
For another episode. We've made it. 2026 is almost over.
That is what February seems to herald for me. It's the feeling of, oh God, here we go again. I think we make the same joke last year where 1 month kicks over and you're basically at the end of the year.
It does feel that way.
Yeah, it's like time to talk about Game of the Year, time to start prepping
February's
for
so short, too.
the Game
it just
Awards.
Rushes by. It's
Yeah, I think
the
that's
little
part of
one.
And hey, if you want to help us make this show possible, you should become a Maximum Fun member. We are entirely listener supported, and you can join in on the fun by going to MaximumFun.org/join. And in addition to making the show possible, you will also get access to our monthly bonus episodes. We do special episodes just for subscribers every single month, including one we just did for January about the TV show Pluribus, where we all watched the first season and dug deep into it. And I don't think we have announced our February one yet, but we will soon enough. But yeah, lots of good stuff in there. Huge backlog full of bonus episodes. Go check it out if you haven't already. Become a member. Go to MaximumFun.org/join. All right, guys. We've been avoiding this for way too long, but it's time to talk about Dragon Quest, a series that we have not really discussed all that much on this podcast. Dragon Quest, for people who aren't familiar or people who just need a refresher, is a turn-based RPG series originally created by Enix, now by Square Enix. But, which, by the way, is still mind-blowing to this day. Square was responsible for Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest's biggest rival, and the two of them merged in 2003 to form Square Enix, and now they're part of the same company. They're under the same roof.
Enix sounds like you're giving a cool nickname to Square Enix, but it was actually the name of a previous company. Like, you know how people call Square Enix Square all the time? We should really be using the full names, because this episode, if anything, is proving to people that that's so important.
Like, I'm picturing an apostrophe before the Enix.
Yeah.
You know, they're Enix, but it means Square Enix.
It's a shortcut, yeah. Dragon Quest started in 1986. It was inspired by series like Wizardry and Ultima. It was notable for having art by Dragon Ball Z creator Akira Toriyama, who died recently. It also had music by Koichi Sugiyama, who also died recently. Yuji Horii, the creator of the series, is still alive. There have been 11 mainline entries in the Dragon Quest series, and there is a 12th that is announced and on the way. It was announced a long time ago, and I think we should hear more about it, hopefully in the next few months or next couple of years. And Dragon Quest is, as some people might know, so popular in Japan that it is essentially a national holiday when one of these comes out. There are all sorts of stories and kind of rumors and internet myths over the years that have floated around about people skipping school, about them having to move the release date of Dragon Quest from weekdays to Saturdays because kids kept skipping school to go and buy it and play it. It is a humongous series in Japan. The kind of iconic slime enemy, who is the Dragon Quest mascot, appears everywhere in Japan, but it never really took off in the West quite as much. It came the closest circa 2017, 2018, when Dragon Quest XI came out, and that became fairly popular here. That was a huge seller. It sold something like 9 million copies, more than 9 million copies, including a decent number in the West, but still hasn't quite taken over on our side of the ocean, which might be why we haven't really talked about it all that much on this show. So before we talk a little bit about the most recent release and the kind of the news pick for this series and this episode, why don't we talk a little bit about our own kind of experiences with this series? Have you guys, let's start with you, Kirk. Have you played any of these Dragon Quest games? What's your level of experience with this series?
So I have a little bit, but the series has never stuck with me. It's never landed. I've never been totally pulled into one. I played, I want to say it was 4 on the DS. Is that right? Did they make a DS port of 4? I played some of that and knew that it was a beloved series. So it was during this period in the 2000s when I was playing catch up and I kind of going to video game homeschool, I guess, because I didn't play video games for most of the 2000s and wanted to write about them more and know more about them. So I was kind of trying to play games that I'd missed. And that was a hit or miss experience. And some of that process involved discovering that there were famous series that I didn't really connect with. And Dragon Quest was one of them. I played some of it, but I like a turn-based RPG, but there's just a few things about Dragon Quest, maybe that we can get into, that just don't totally connect for me. And that I think I get the feeling maybe would help us understand also why they don't always connect outside of Japan.
Yes, we will definitely get into that. Maddy, what about you? What's your level of experience with this series?
Total newcomer. So we're going to talk about the Dragon Quest VII Reimagined demo, which all of us played, and that is my first time ever playing any Dragon Quest at all. But I will say, I do have a pretty significant background that I've talked about on this show with Akira Toriyama and his art style, and have watched all of Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z. So I actually really like his really distinctive art style. So that was very pleasant for me in checking this out. And I'll admit I had kind of forgotten that was something that Dragon Quest was known for, because these games are such a blind spot for me that playing it reminded me of that. And I was like, oh, right, this has really distinctive, like kind of the big head, little body style, like super cartoony animations aspect that I enjoy to Toriyama's art. So that was just something I liked and was like, oh, right, this is a really distinctive piece of this series that I just didn't know about.
You know, to jump onto that, around the same time I was going to video game homeschool university, I played Chrono Trigger on the DS as well and really liked that game. And that game, of course, notably has characters designed by Toriyama as well.
Yeah, it's you see a piece of art and you can kind of tell it's Toriyama. He has
such a distinctive style.
Yeah,
in a nice way, I think. I kind of like when an artist just defines themselves and is like, this is it. This is my thing. And everybody's going to be able to tell when I worked on something. And yeah, God bless him. He really did that.
So let's talk about the games. So the Dragon Quest series, it was released the release in the West was always a little weird. The first couple of games were called Dragon Warrior, I believe, up through 7, because they thought Dragon Warrior would sound cooler to us Westerners than Quest. I mean, some marketing.
We love war here.
Yeah, some marketing person somewhere was like, ooh, Quest, that sounds like nerds. We should call it Warrior for these Americans. And I believe it was 8 that switched to the proper name, Dragon Quest. And yeah, Kirk, those DS remakes, they wound up re-releasing a bunch of games over the years, including 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 for the DS, and then 3DS. All those games were re-released. 9, I believe, was a DS game to begin with. 10 was an online game, and then 11 was on modern platforms. And then more recently, over the last 3 years or so, they've been doing these HD remasters of some of the games. So they started with Dragon Quest III HD, which was released in 2024, and then they did 1 and 2, which was released last year. If you're wondering, 3 is a prequel to 1 and 2, which is why they released it in that order. And then now is 7. And so Dragon Quest VII Reimagined is the kind of the most full-fledged remake on the taxonomy that we came up with a couple of years ago. It would be somewhere in the middle, not quite Final Fantasy VII remake, but also not an HD remaster type of thing. This is a full-fledged remake. And what they actually did with this game was they streamlined a lot of it. The original Dragon Quest VII was known for being very unwieldy and padded, and
very long, right?
And very long.
It was like famously long
because of that padding, yeah. And they changed a whole lot of things, and they've redone the entire art style to make it actually seem a lot more like the Toriyama character designs. It's a pretty cool looking reimagining. And so I've been playing all of these remakes as they've come out, which made me think of a lot about the kind of the nature of Dragon Quest. And I want to talk a little bit about what you were mentioning earlier, Kirk, about how the rhythms of these games just don't do it for you. There's something very distinct about these games. Very, I don't know, I guess I might call it quintessentially JRPG, in that they all really follow a very similar routine. You start out as a voiceless young person. I believe it's almost always a boy. I don't remember if you can play as a girl in any of the games, but you're a young person. Oftentimes you're woken up by your parents and told to go out and do something menial. And then you meet up with some friends who eventually become party members. And then you get roped into some adventure. And eventually you just wind up going from town to town across this big world. And every town has a problem to solve. And that problem usually involves going into a dungeon and fighting random encounters until you get to the end of the dungeon, and then you fight a boss, and then you go back to the town and solve the problem, and then you get something that lets you go and journey to the next town. Maybe it's a ship, or maybe it's a key, or maybe it's a bridge, or whatever it is, that'll let you keep going on the adventure. And I think there are definitely appealing parts of that formula, but it also is a formula, and different games in this series try to switch that up in different ways. We'll talk about what 7 does specifically in a bit, but it is very much the same sort of routine, and it's particularly pronounced when they've re-released so many of these in a row, and I've been playing each of them and been like, okay, yeah, this is really the same thing over and over again. But Kirk, I'm curious to hear for you what makes you bounce off this series, or what's your take on the rhythms of it all?
Yeah, it's not really the rhythms for me, because that could be said of a lot of RPGs, right? It's not that uncommon for a game to have you go to a town and find a person in the town who needs help, and there's a dungeon nearby. I mean, that could be just about any RPG. For me, it's more the aesthetics, I think. There's something about these games that I find just a little bit odd, or maybe even uncanny. There's a childishness to them that I think a lot of people like. There's this kind of, oh, gee, we're going on an adventure, I'm a kid and it's time to find my destiny feeling that, could be really appealing. It has a kind of almost a make-believe quality to it, like your children make-believing that you're on a quest. And that's really charming and is a nice contrast, actually, to the angsty melodrama of, say, Final Fantasy, especially Final Fantasy VII, the one that I think we're all the most familiar with. But there's something else about it. So some of it is the music. I really like the music. The music is by Koichi Sugiyama, a famous composer, and I would say a very particular compositional aesthetic within the world of Japanese role-playing games, and a very conservative one. I think he writes music that sounds very old-fashioned. It almost sounds patriotic, I would describe it. Some of that is knowing a bit about Sugiyama's personal politics, like he was a somewhat conservative guy, and you can hear it in the music. There's a really neat story to the Dragon Quest music. I think it was one of the very early true acoustic orchestral performances of video game music. You can listen to this on YouTube. There is an album they put out in 1986 that's like I think it's the Tokyo Strings Orchestra playing the music from Dragon Quest. And when you listen to it, and when I listen to it, I'm struck by a few things. One is it's lovely. He's a very skilled composer and he writes nice melodies. Another is that it sounds just like the music that you will hear in any Dragon Quest game, including the ones that come out now. And it really is this orchestral, martial, these marches, these kind of patriotic themes. If you compare that to the kinds of music that you will hear either in Nintendo games, in Nintendo RPGs, in Final Fantasy, certainly, it's like a world of difference from, say, Nobuo Uematsu, who is like a prog rock keyboard player and is writing like shredding guitar riffs and like 12/8 drum fills. It's just a totally different world. So the music sets me in this certain mindset that I don't mind. I find the music really charming, even though it gets repetitive. It even began to get repetitive to me in the DQ7 remake that we were just playing. But it sets me in a certain mindset. And then there's just something about the way these characters look, the way they talk, that I find a little bit uncanny. I don't like slimes. I find them weird. You know, if you compare the slime to the
Hot take.
chocobo.
Yeah, hot, really hot. Blazing
Is
hot.
it that hot? I think that a lot of people find them a little odd. I mean, I get why they're funny.
Cute.
They're supposed to be cute.
But they're cute in a creepy way. Their eyes are kind of dead. They have these just weird, like they almost look like half drawn. If you compare a slime to, say, a chocobo, you know, they're two very different aesthetics for a mascot creature. And the chocobo is this big kind of horse bird. It has this face. It has this theme music that you really know super well. That's kind of goofy. There's just, I don't know, like for me at least, I find that to be pretty appealing. It's pretty silly, but it's something that I kind of can hold on to. Slimes, I don't really understand. And then there's just a lot of that, you know, with these games in general. I mean, I found like the aesthetics even of this remake of Dragon Quest VII to be very strange. The character designs, they look like puppets. They look like the characters from Team America World Police. The first time this big square-jawed like weird puppet guy comes out and his name is Kiefer and he says hello to you, like it's weird, right? And I think some people like that. And I don't hate it or anything, but I do find the whole experience to be a little bit uncanny.
Interesting. Okay, I want to go back to something you said a couple of minutes ago, actually, which is about the how every RPG, when distilled down, follows that same rhythm of going to towns and solving people's problems and going through dungeons. I think that's true, but I think what's more distinct about Dragon Quest is that in a lot of these games, there are a couple of exceptions, but in most of these, there isn't much in the way of overarching story, and your main character is silent, and in some cases, all the characters are silent or basically don't have personalities. So, essentially, it's a lot more pronounced feeling as a series of short stories. Dragon Quest VII is kind of the epitome of that because it is literally just a series of short stories. You're going to different islands and solving their problems, and they just have self-contained stories. But the only overarching story is, the world's in trouble, go save it. Oh, the princess has been kidnapped, go save her. As opposed to other RPGs, Final Fantasy VII as an example, where you are going out into this world, having these very distinct characters, knowing that this guy Sephiroth, who used to be cool and an ally and a superhero, is now turned into a psychotic villain and is murdering people, and you're following his trail of wreckage as you go. So you're still doing that same, I guess, rhythm of going from town to town and solving people's problems, but you have these larger goals and mysteries that are keeping you going throughout the process, which I think helps make it a lot more palatable and make you want to see it through to the end. With a lot of these Dragon Quest games, I find myself playing 5, 6, maybe 10 hours max, and then stopping because there's nothing really carrying me through. And as much as I might just find it pleasant to look at it play, there isn't really that kind of driving story part. And we will talk about the gameplay because I want to get into that as well. But that, I mean, I think is the biggest difference in terms of that town dungeon structure as opposed to a lot of other RPGs.
That actually reminds me of something I was thinking when Kirk was talking about the aesthetics of the game, which is it similarly reminds me of a cartoon for children, and especially a cartoon like Dragon Ball, where the characters often reset over and over again. Goku has to fight a new enemy. Oh, they're all stronger than ever. And like, then everything kind of resets again. And that sort of formulaic thing of like, we're just fighting over and over and over again can be kind of pleasing because it's formulaic. And this game has a quality that's very similar to a child's cartoon in the sense that everyone that you meet, like the adult characters as well, I think this is kind of what Kirk is driving at, is childlike and has that aw gee, aw shucks dialogue style. It's not just the three main kids. I don't know if you meet other kids later on, but they have that style as well. But it's like every other adult in the game also has this kind of G-rated boy golly, like even when you meet the king, the way that he talks to you doesn't feel like the way that a king would be addressing a child. It all feels like it's part of a world of make-believe. And that to me, combined with the really cartoonish, elevated, uncanny, yes, looking characters, is like, okay, well, this is like a child's game. I guess I'm asking, is this game for children? Like, is that maybe what what we're realizing here.
I mean, all games are for
well,
children.
maybe Final Fantasy VII isn't, but
I think you mean primarily for
Yeah.
children, which I do think this is a criticism that I've heard levied, but also one that I've seen parried in various descriptions of this game, in part because of the complexity and depth of the combat system and of the various systems in this game. I was reading, I think it was Michael McWhirter's write-up on Polygon, and he essentially made this argument, or he mentioned the complexity of the game in this specific context, saying, yes, there are childlike aspects to the aesthetics and the storytelling, but the game itself is actually quite complex and satisfying once you begin to really get into it.
It's funny because I actually find the opposite to be true with this game specifically. I think with something like Dragon Quest XI, which I played a lot of, actually, Kirk, it's funny, I stopped playing that game or got sick of that game because the music was so repetitive and annoying and really bad in that game.
Were you playing, weren't there two versions of the soundtrack to that game? That's the one where there was famously,
Well, yeah,
they
two versions
released
of
an
the
orchestral
entire-
recording.
Well, there's like an entire 16 or 8-bit version of the entire game that has an 8-bit version of the soundtrack, like to correspond with it, like NES style, if that's what you're thinking of.
Yeah, I think that when the game originally came out, and I'll bing in if I'm wrong about this, I believe when the game originally came out, there was a, non-8-bit, but a sort of sampled and not great sounding fake
yeah.
orchestra. And then there were mods released for it where people figured out a way to take the WAV files from the orchestral soundtrack and put them into the game. And then I believe eventually Square put out a version of the game that had the proper orchestral sound.
You're right. Although for me, it was the music itself, not the quality of the music.
Yes,
not the sound
well,
quality. It was
it's
the
quite
music itself.
repetitive. I can imagine.
But anyway, as far as the gameplay, Dragon Quest XI, I think that is true of. I don't know what McWhirter was writing about Dragon Quest VII, because really the opposite is true with this, because of all the streamlining they did.
Yes, it's his article, and we can link it in the show notes. It was his impressions of the new one.
So oftentimes, the way the gameplay works is you have turn-based combat. You give your party a series of orders, fight, heal, use spells, use skills. In most of these games, there's some sort of class or job system where you can build up your classes and get more powerful and have each party member be a different class, so you can customize your party and play around with that. The strategy is twofold. One is kind of on a micro level. You're trying to figure out, okay, how do I want to take out this enemy? What's his weakness? Do I want to heal or attack, et cetera, familiar turn-based rhythms. And then on a macro level, it's as you go through a dungeon, you have to think about resource management in your head. So you don't want to blow all your spells on weak enemies, just to make those fights go faster, because then you won't have any magic points when you get to the final boss. And the problem with this remake specifically, Dragon Quest VII Reimagined, which I assume you guys won't play much further than the demo, but I played a good chunk of it on a code provided by Square Enix. And as you play more, you start to really notice this, is that they've made it so streamlined and easy that there's just no strategy involved whatsoever. So I'll give you a few examples. One is that in many games like this, you have to kind of identify an enemy and be like, okay, what's its weakness? Oh, this is a fire enemy. I'll use an ice spell on it. In this game, it will give you a thumbs up for when you hover over a spell, and it'll tell you whether that enemy is weak to that spell. You won't even have to guess and check. It's just like it will tell you. Another thing is that resource management I mentioned. In this game, there are goddess statues placed before every single boss, which heal your entire party's magic and hit points, which means you don't even have to think about resource management. You can play the game on autopilot. You could have it play itself for you, essentially. Another thing is that oftentimes in these Dragon Quest games, you have to think about healing your characters, making sure they don't die, because if they die, you have to jump through hoops to revive them, and that could be a real pain and just adds a little level of tension, a level of friction that wouldn't otherwise be there. In this game, if one of your party members dies in combat, they automatically revive at the end of the battle. And I could go on, but essentially, not to mention, there are also like objective points on the map that tell you exactly where to go, and I don't believe you can turn those off. So it is really, you are playing a paint by numbers in this. There is no strategy, there is no depth, there is no complexity to this, as opposed to something like Dragon Quest XI, where there is a little bit more of that complexity, and some of the other games I've played. This one is streamlined to the point where it's just not even really all that fun to play. It just gets really boring, unfortunately, which I think is a flaw of this remake.
When I started my new game, there were some difficulty settings. Have you messed around with those?
Yes, so those are for like you can make monsters more powerful, you can get less experience. There's some cool sliders you can play around with, but all the things I just mentioned you cannot change. Another one, for example, on the resource management front is whenever one of your characters levels up, they will get instantly healed and completely all their magic points will be filled. So again, you just don't have to think about resource management in a way that you did in previous Dragon Quest games, and that can't be turned off. There's no toggle for that, so it's not an option.
It seems like the appeal of this game, and even from what I played of the demo, I felt this, is that it is kind of a really good second screen game. I'm sure it's still quite long, and it's very pleasant. And like you said, it sort of sands off a lot of edges, so you don't have to really focus on it too hard, or at least from what you played. Like, that's an appealing type of game, too. A game that you can just put on while you're, watching Netflix.
I guess. I don't know. I don't find it that appealing as a second screen game. Like, I would rather my second screen game be something where I have to think at least a little bit, or at least get some sort of tactile enjoyment. I hate to sound so down on it, because I do like a lot of Dragon Quest games. It's just that this remake, they've really sanded it down to the point where it's just kind of monotonous to play. And they did a lot of good things too. I mean, a lot of the streamlining is actually really smart in that they removed a lot of the backtracking and really annoying parts that were in the original version of this game. They've made it much shorter. They've removed some of the islands. As I mentioned earlier, it's the structure of like you go to different islands and solve their problems and in the past, and then their island is restored and brought back to life in the future, and you can go in the present and you can go and visit it and see how things have changed. But I mean, Kirk, to your point, I think at least for me personally, it has not been the ideal second screen game, just because I just kept playing and I was like, why am I doing this? I feel like I'm just like going through the motions, paint by numbers, like I said earlier, which is too bad. This series does have a lot going for it, I think, and Dragon Quest XI, I think, is a good example of that, musical woes aside. And that is a game that actually I would be curious if we ever all play it one day for some reason, or maybe we'll check out 12 when that comes out, because I would be curious to hear what you guys think of a more complex, more elaborate version of this series.
Yeah, I started 11 and played just a bit of it because so many people have been so up on it. We should say Griffin McElroy, friend of the show, and Bestie's co-host, is like a huge fan of these games, and his enthusiasm for them really makes me just want to feel that and want to get into them. And it does seem like the kind of series that I could maybe find a way into, because as much as I've never latched onto one, it's not like I hate it or anything. It's just it always kind of keeps me at arm's length. There's something about it where I think, oh, I don't know, maybe I should just be playing something else. I had that thought playing this game partly because I love this Square Enix house style they've come up with. This 2D, 3D, or HD 3D, what do they call it? HD 2D, maybe that's
HD
it?
2D.
HD 2D, where they have these lovely lighting effects and depth of field, and then you're moving around in a world that looks sort of old-fashioned, like an old game, but also obviously could only run on a new system. And as I was playing it, I was thinking, I really love this. I think this is a great way to make all of these older games new again, to bring them back, which seems worth doing, especially because a lot of people in the West didn't play some of these older Dragon Quest games. And then I personally would just have the thought, what I really should be playing right now is Octopath Traveler 2, because I played a little bit of that. And I know that game is amazing. And that game also has this style and, just grabbed me a lot more. And I heard so many warm recommendations of it, So for me, it's a little bit of the challenge of there are a lot of this style of classic JRPG, turn-based, beautiful looking, incredible music, cool story, works as a second screen game, runs really well on the Switch or the Steam Deck. There are so many at this point. My backlog of them is essentially infinite. And so each new one that comes out, like this one, is competing with all of the other ones that I hope to one day play.
Yeah, I'm curious also, why Dragon Quest VII? Is there a particular love for this game, Jason, that would explain why this is the one that they're remaking as opposed to another one? Is there something about the story as it goes along that people really love, or the characters? I thought they were cute, so I could see that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some love for it out there. So each of these islands has a short story, and some of them I think are pretty heart-wrenching, and then the overall story gets a little dark as you go, even if it doesn't seem that way from the get-go.
Well, the one that you do play through in the demo, I would agree, is pretty dark and sad, and I liked it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the overall story involving the characters also gets like the like Maribel and Kiefer's story gets a little dark, even though you don't see that from right away.
Well, Kiefer has to sacrifice a lot of people to defuse the bomb. You know, he's going to torture people.
Yes. Kiefer, aka Jack Bauer. Imagine if Jack Bauer had that square face and ridiculous like smirk.
Kiefer looks a little bit like Kiefer.
There should be a Toriyama anime style of 24. I would watch 24 if it was an anime. They should do that.
They really, I mean, that's kind of Team America World Police.
It is a little bit, yeah.
There is actually, I was obsessed with this. There's like a Japanese like guy singing. I think it was a commercial for 24 in Japan, and it's like a Japanese guy singing the
like
Jack
the
Bauer
plot.
song, and it's amazing.
Oh, really?
That's
No.
amazing.
I'll
I
see if
gotta
I
look
can
that up
find
after
it. I'll
this.
send it to you guys, and we'll throw a link in the show notes if I can find it.
俺はジャック・バウアー切れやすい男さ俺はジャック・バウアー意外と泣き虫
But anyway, I mean, Maddy, I think that with 7, I don't think it's more beloved than others necessarily. I think they saw it as the one that needed to be changed the most in the most drastic way in order to be more palatable for people today. And so they chose to remake it with a lot of it cut out and a lot of it streamlined. I spoke to the producer, Ichiyama, who told me that he, as a kid, played Dragon. He's very young. He's like 30 or something like that. As a kid, he played Dragon Quest VII and like didn't even like stop playing it in the middle because he was like turned off by it for various reasons. And so this is kind of him being like, all right, I want to make this game a little more approachable for people. And in many ways, I should be clear, it succeeds. It is like the streamlining decisions they made are really good. There's a whole part of the beginning. You guys did that part where you have to like go and find things for your like creepy uncle, right? Like you have to find the bucket things. You know what I'm talking about?
The empty bottles.
Yeah, the
for
empty
him.
bottles.
Yeah.
That part is like totally streamlined for this. Like in the original game, going through all that, there's a lot more backtracking and back and forth you have to do. There's also like a whole bunch of like very tedious puzzles you have to do in that first shrine before you even go to an island. You have to go through. You don't even get combat for like the first 2 hours of the original game. It's very tedious and very padded, I would say. So it was a good one to remake, and they did a good job. And also, I think it looks really cool. I think the art style is really cool. They just needed to make all these like difficulty features have toggles, which would be an easy fix. I mean, they can fix this game by just putting out a patch that is like, hey, you want people to revive after battles? Yes or no? You want to have HP restored after level ups? Yes or no? Do you want to have goddess statues before every boss? Yes or no? And that would make it much more pleasant an experience, I would say.
Playing a game like this brings into relief for me the way that turn-based combat has evolved over the last 30, 40 years. I think a lot to the better, a lot in ways that I find really cool. And going back to a game where it really is kind of, yes, there are weaknesses and you need to find them, but there isn't some extra mechanical hook the way that in a game like Metaphor or ReFantasia or in a Persona or, I mean, Final Fantasy doesn't really count. Those remakes are kind of real time. So, I mean, that's going in a different direction to evolve the idea.
Well, the turn-based Final Fantasies also have their own hooks. FF10 has its own sorts of like
Sure.
hooks where
And
you
there's
can swap
still
out party members for weaknesses. And
even in the real-time ones.
And I would say that FF10 actually feels somewhat in between for me. It feels a little bit old-fashioned, but modern enough that I dig it. I played that after I think I had played...
It did come out in 2001.
That's what I'm saying.
Fair.
It was... You're right, that's why.
Yeah.
No, it's not like... not a mystery why that's the case. But I think I played the Vita port of that game after playing Persona 4. And Persona 4, of course, a more recent game. And Persona games, like Metaphor, the way that weaknesses work, the way they've stacked these systems on top of one another, where you hit a weakness and you get extra turns, and it becomes about the turn economy and this kind of really complex management of understanding your enemy, understanding your party, arranging your party in these clever ways to build up these kind of satisfying domino structures in the combat. I mean, I find that really appealing. I think a lot of people probably do. And going back to an older fashioned game, I didn't play enough of this and I've never gotten far enough in a Dragon Quest to find out if there does come a point where combat becomes something more like that, where you're setting up these structures and then watching them activate. I guess I should ask a question to you, Jason, since you've played more of these. Does that actually happen, or is it just a different kind of thing?
It's a different kind of thing because it's a little bit more about just your classic like 90s style where it's about choosing to heal and play conservatively or play aggressively, or like choosing to use buff spells on your party versus just going all out and attacking. It's more about those kinds of decisions, which you've probably played before in a million other turn-based games. There's no complexity on the level of a Metaphor or a Persona where you feel like you're doing something fresh every time and you're making interesting decisions all the time. That doesn't really happen in one of these games. That said, when they're at their best, you do enter a kind of flow state, and you do have to have in the back of your head a little bit of that tension at the very least, where it's like, okay, I need to be thinking about this at least a little bit, because if I don't conserve MP, the boss is going to kick my ass. Or like if one of my party members dies here, then that'll be a pain because I'll have to go back and find like a revive spell at somewhere. I'll have to use one of my rare Yggdrasil seeds, which are like in some of the games a rare way to like revive one of your party members. So having that tension there, I think, is the key that makes it I wouldn't say the best combat system in the world, but at least more interesting than it is where there are just no stakes whatsoever. It's kind of like playing Dragon Quest, playing one of those Dragon Quest games that I just mentioned is kind of like playing poker with people and there's a little bit of money on the line, whereas playing Dragon Quest VII is like playing poker on the computer, just like to kill time during your workday, and there's no stakes whatsoever, and you could just quit it at any time and it doesn't matter. Just without stakes at all, it just feels really flat and pointless to me.
Yeah, I think thinking this through, the development or the change that's happened is that more games are experimenting with giving you access to the action economy in the gameplay. This is something actually that the 100 line Last Defense Academy does as well, where there are enemies that if you beat them, you get an extra action point. That's something that the Persona games and Metaphor do as well, where by hitting a weakness, you get more moves. That's kind of the idea. And I don't know who had this idea first or where this development started happening, but it's the thing that makes a turn-based game. It's the specific kind of complexity, I think, that I really like in a turn-based game, where not only are you managing damage and health, those kind of two axes, those two faders on your fader board, but you're also trying to manage turns. And if you really play well, you can deny the enemy turns. And that development over the last however many years, that's been the thing, I think, that really adds an extra layer that I find very interesting.
Yeah, that's one way to do it. There have been other ways that like developers have played around with turn-based combat to make it more interesting. A lot of times with job systems, you can do really interesting things. In some games, as we've talked about in the past, it's more about building your characters and then taking them into battle, and it's like largely about the preparation, and the execution is more just kind of going through the motions. Final Fantasy Tactics might be a good example of that, where a lot of it is more about how prepared you are and how geared out and how good your job setup is than it is about the actual battle execution, although that can have some strategy too. So yeah,
I mean, I'm thinking of. Sorry, one other thought I had is that Bravely Default is another one where I really like how in that you can charge up your turns and you can spend them ahead of time. Another one that plays with the action economy in fun ways.
Yeah, but I mean, I've been thinking about Final Fantasy Tactics as we've been talking too, and I guess it is actually still newer than some of these older Dragon Quest games because it's 98 when it originally came out, right? So in my mind, I think of that as an older game, but it was still iterating on a lot of the things that Kirk is talking about, where it is adding in this concept of in that game, it's speed. You're not really gaining extra turns, but you can kind of add on a concept of, there's time mages as a job class, for example, and that kind of allows you to kind of borrow advanced time, and that changes the battle order, for example. And the job system is so complex in that game that it allows for what is a pretty simplistic turn-based economy at first to become pretty multifaceted. And that's part of why I found it so entertaining, and why something like this, I'm more likely to be like, I need to be watching a television show in order to complete
Tactics
this.
also introduces positional
that's true.
strategy. Like, that is a really big difference, and something
That's
that I
true.
really like about tactics games in general is that,
As like 100 Line.
not only are you managing an action economy, but position winds up mattering in a totally different way.
I want to bring up two things that I think are interesting about the Dragon Quest series. One is that Enix, as opposed to Square, Enix was always working with external developers and having them come in and make stuff, and then Enix would publish it. And the Dragon Quest games have, I believe, always, if not always, almost always been developed by external companies. So, for example, some of them were made by Level 5. Others were made by, I believe, Armor Project is another name of a studio that works on them. And so you have a very different sort of development style than, say, Final Fantasy, where it's made by the same team. A lot of the times it keeps going from game to game, especially back in the 90s. It was a lot of the same people who moved from FF4 to FF5 to FF6, etc. The other thing that I think is interesting is that Dragon Quest, in contrast to Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest has always avoided change and always tried to follow the same formula. Final Fantasy games, one of the reasons that series is so enduring is that every single game has tried to do something new, create some sort of new level system, turn-based, or some sort of new combat system, action system. Like, it's always new, to the point where, like, there's some crazy experiments and some of them work better than others, but it's always trying something interesting and trying to innovate. Dragon Quest, occasionally it'll try to innovate, and then fans will get so mad that they'll turn, that the developers will say, actually, we're not going to do that. Dragon Quest IX was announced as an action RPG way back in, I believe it was 2007, 2006, something like that, 2008. And fans got so mad at the idea that a Dragon Quest game would be an action game that they backtracked, and the developers were like, actually, sorry, we're going to make a turn-based game. There is something about these games that I think, especially in Japan, feels very familiar, very traditional. It's almost like celebrating Christmas with your family in the same place every single year. Like, you don't want things to change. You want that tradition there. You want to hear that same exact music when you open up the loading screen. Dun, 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 dun. And you just want it always to be the same. You want the same slimes to be the first enemy. You want the same, like, cast of characters, et cetera, et cetera. You always want to have mini medals down wells. There's so many just kind of repeating things that you see in all of these games.
The mini medals are in every game?
Mini medals are in every single Dragon Quest game. Yes.
Wow.
And so I think that is also just kind of a big part of this franchise, and maybe why another reason that it hasn't quite gotten as much steam in the West, where I think people are looking for maybe a little bit more innovation. I mean, it's certainly one of the reasons that I've always been a humongous Final Fantasy fan and much less of a Dragon Quest fan over the years, is because the Final Fantasy games felt like they were constantly surprising me and delighting me with their innovations and just kind of changing up the formula every single time.
Yeah, it's funny. I played Dragon Quest Builders and really like that. And almost I get the sense that recently Square Enix has been more open to the idea of just releasing other styles of games in the Dragon Quest, like under the Dragon Quest brand. Is that the case?
That's not a recent thing. No, that's always been. There have been Dragon Quest Monsters, Dragon Quest, Builders, Dragon Quest. There have been all sorts of spin-offs over the years. Spin-offs, fair game for experimenting. It's just the mainline games, like, you're following the same formula. And I'm very curious to actually see what Dragon Quest XII does and how much it kind of just follows the same path versus tries to do something different. The one thing I'll say about Dragon Quest XI that I think is one of the reasons that people rave about about that one, especially compared to some of the others, is that one has a much more of an interesting overarching story that kind of carries you through and makes you want to keep playing, even as it is just kind of repeating a lot of the same tropes and formulas as previous games. It does have that kind of like interesting overarching plot and mystery and questions that it leaves you with. And so I think it's a more interesting game than 7 in a lot of ways.
So our friend Chris Plant at his podcast Post Games also has a new episode about Dragon Quest, and he has a theory that I'm curious what you think of, Jason, that in the early years especially, because localization of Dragon Quest took so long, the games were coming out in the West at a time when they were already dated. There was it was an NES game being released in America when the Super Nintendo was already out, and so that was part of the reason that they didn't catch on.
Yeah, could be.
No, I was hoping you would be like, no, Plant's wrong.
Well, I mean, that was also the case.
You guys could fight.
That was also the case with other Squaresoft games back then, or Squaresoft games. It was the case with Enix and Squaresoft games. So, like, that was the case with Final Fantasy, also to the point where they skipped releasing certain games in the West, in part because they would be so late. Like, I believe they decided not to release Final Fantasy 2 or 3 on the NES because the Super Nintendo was already out here, and so they were like, we'll just go straight to 4 and then we'll call it 2 in the US, so it doesn't seem like we skipped any, which is Final Fantasy also had that same problem, but it picked up a little more steam in the West. I wouldn't say it sold gangbusters, at least until Final Fantasy VII in the West, but it did pretty well despite also being localized later here. But yeah, it's definitely possible. I mean, my theory is more that it's just about the kind of that gameplay just not being quite as appealing to Western audiences for whatever reasons.
Yeah, and also them sticking with it, right, because the series is so kind of fundamentally conservative that it's been the same this whole time. If it didn't appeal at first, it's not going to start appealing to people now, and they're not changing it, so,
Yeah, well, I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see how things go moving forward. Anyway, if you're curious, I mean, I cannot say that I like full-throatedly recommend Dragon Quest VII Reimagined because of the problems that I mentioned earlier. I think if they do patch some of that stuff, toggle some of that stuff, make it a little bit more of a kind of add a little bit more attention to the experience, then it'll be a little bit more interesting. But I do appreciate the streamlining they did as a dad of 2 small children who doesn't have a ton of spare time and wants games to be a little bit more streamlined. I do appreciate that part of it. I just wish it wasn't so frictionless. All right, why don't we take a break and we'll come back with one more thing.
The Flophouse is a podcast where we watch a bad movie and then we talk about it.
Guys, how does E.T. poop?
Well, he's not that regular, but I mean, as he's gotten older.
He has 2 cloacas, 1 under each arm.
No, I was just looking forward to going through the other ways in which Wild Wild West is historically inaccurate.
You know how much movies cost nowadays when you add in your popped corn and your bagel bites and your cheese fritters?
You can't go wrong with a Henry Cavill mustache. Here at Henry Cavill Mustaches, the only supplier.
The Flophouse. New episodes every Saturday. Find it at MaximumFun.org.
And we are back, Kirk, Maddy. It is time for one more thing. Maddy, why don't you go first?
Sure. So I played a video game called Space Warlord Baby Trading Simulator.
So what's this game about, Maddy?
Actually, it's kind of complicated to explain despite the hyper-specific name. So this is actually a sequel to a game I haven't played that is an organ trading simulator game that I'll kind of briefly explain because it helps set up what happens in this game. So both games, as far as I understand, having not played the first one, but definitely the second one, take place in a science fiction futuristic world where there's an intergalactic stock market. And there's aliens and cyborgs, and they're all trading together on this big show floor. And ethics be damned. They don't care about that. They're trading alien organs in the first game. And in the second game, it does sound like they're trading literal babies, but that's actually not quite what the game is about. It is instead kind of the game opens with like this title card that explains to you psychics exist And so that means that the entire concept of the stock market has been destroyed because you can't bet on anything anymore because all corporations have predetermined destinies now. Everybody knows the future of everything except for what will happen to a fetus that has just been conceived. That is something that psychics cannot predict what will happen in their lives. And so you're actually betting on the show floor against different events that will transpire in each of these science fiction alien and cyborg babies' lives. So
it's a very bleak commentary. That,
I know,
especially that I find this so believable.
I know it's kind of it's also a game that like opens with a content warning that's like, this is upsetting.
In a world where there's nothing left to gamble on.
Yeah,
people found one
it's
thing.
It's intended to be
Wait,
satirical.
is this a simulation game?
Yes,
What is the actual gameplay?
So
You're,
the
like, making
actual
decisions?
gameplay is that you're participating in the stock market. You play as an alien who's betting. You're placing stock bets on this trading floor. And you have to decide whether to invest or not based on what you think is going to happen to a baby that you select at the outset of each run. And then all you're really watching is a graph going up and down, just like you're watching, like, you know, if you're loading stocks on an app, for example. Or
on the Bloomberg terminal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So
right.
at the first couple runs, you're like, okay, this game's completely random. Like all I could possibly do in order to earn money against this is try to guess what's going to happen to this baby. And like, these are all kind of science fiction events for the babies, by the way. Some of them are sort of like events that you might recognize from your real life. Like, oh, the baby, you know, grows to be 20 and they get a promotion. And like, then the stock's going up and up and up. That's like a good thing in their life. And then something bad happens to them. Like, oh, they lost a bet with a friend, or like their house caught on fire.
So the up and down is kind of the quality of the event, whether it's a good or bad event.
That's right. Yeah, that's considered good or bad.
And you choose to trade and
yes, and
sell
you choose to buy
points?
stocks or sell stocks against like people kind of placing monetary value on each of these events in the baby's life.
Okay.
And
Can
so
you short,
yes,
like,
you can.
future
So
events?
after a few rounds, you unlock a couple of additional things, which are you meet some other kind of somewhat psychic aliens who are able to predict some things about each of the babies, which helps you decide like, okay, which baby am I going to select at the outset? And one of the things that I tend to select is
that insider trading?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is not an ethical. Jason, you've heard the name of the game. This is not an ethical stock market at all. So like you can find out whether the baby's going to have a mostly positive or mostly negative life. I like to select that because then I know whether I'm going to take a short position. Like if the baby's going to have a pretty terrible life, for example, most of the time, like bad things are going to happen to the baby. You wait until the baby has like a pretty good day, and then you short that baby. And whenever you short the baby, a thing pops up on screen that says "short that baby!" And it's really funny pretty much every time. And then you actually don't get to like close your short right away. That's part of like the stakes of shorting the baby, is that like sometimes you're wrong, you short the baby, and then it actually ends up that the baby has a pretty good day after that, and then you lose a ton of money on the short. Anyway, if you don't know that much about the stock market, this is a great way to learn all those stock market terms in a fictional setting that is completely absurd. It's really silly and also kind of sad, because I feel like when this game was being developed, they probably thought this was like a really extreme satire, whereas now I'm like, people bet against positive and negative events on Polymarket and Kalshi all the time. So like, is this even satirizing anything anymore? I don't know. But I still had a good time playing it. It's only a few hours long. I think they kind of know that after a few hours, it's going to kind of run out of steam. But it's very funny, and like the different kind of color text that pops on screen about the various types of aliens that are participating in the stock market is really fun. The world building is really great and worth it. And the soundtrack is like pulse pumping. Like you really are feeling like it's intense, and you gotta get your bets ready. So yeah, it's called Space Warlord Baby Trading Simulator.
Cool. That sounds good.
Kirk, what's your one more thing?
My one more thing is a book I read by Maria Semple called Where'd You Go, Bernadette, from 2012. Have either of you read this book?
I haven't.
No, but it sounds very familiar. Was this a movie or something also?
Yeah, I didn't actually realize this until I finished it, that they did make it into a movie, which I haven't seen. And it was a pretty big book in 2012 when it came out, I believe. It was just widely read. And that's because it's hilarious and really good. I read this book just essentially in a day. We had a copy of it that I think one of my friends lent me, and then another friend told me she had just read it and laughed, and I realized we had a copy, so I thought I'd just read it. And I loved it, and I really recommend it for a few different reasons. So I will enumerate those reasons now. So this book is an epistolary novel. It is a really, really funny comedy that is also, I think, ultimately a pretty lovely story that is actually about something. It starts out just being very, very funny, and eventually you realize, oh, this does have something to say. It is set in 2012 in Seattle, and it tells the story of a family which the mother, Bernadette Fox, is kind of the central character, and she vanishes. It is made clear at the beginning she has vanished. And her daughter, B. Branch, is the author of this book. And then over the early stages of it, you kind of discover that B is assembling all of these epistolary documents and also commenting on them. So you're basically reading her work as she puts them together. So an epistolary novel is a collection of letters, emails, documents, just anything written that then tells a story as you read through it. So at the beginning, for example, there are a series of emails between parents, neighbors, teachers, and administrators at this small private school in Seattle that are very, very funny. And especially if you've had any interaction with private school or with private school parents, you will laugh and laugh and laugh. It's very funny, very satirical, and pretty scathing. And so you're reading this just like a series of emails in different people's voices, in different formats with fonts. It plays a lot with that kind of humor. One guy writes these really unctuous emails and he's constantly bolding random words in his sentences. We have to stop thinking like Subaru parents and start thinking like Mercedes parents. What is a Mercedes parent? And then he lists what a Mercedes parent is. That kind of thing. It's laugh out loud funny. I mean, I was just laughing and laughing out loud next to Emily, as I'm sure she was looking at me with mild annoyance as I read this book. Bernadette Fox is a very complex woman. She is B's mother, and we get a lot of insight into her because we read a lot of her correspondence. And then also, of course, B's recollections of what her mother is like. Bernadette is married to a man named Elgin Branch. And you find out pretty early on, Bernadette was a brilliant, I would say, genius. Well, she won a MacArthur Genius Grant. So she was a genius architect in Los Angeles, a kind of renegade artist, really, more than a traditional architect, who is still venerated by the architecture community in worldwide, really, even though she has kind of vanished from view after moving to Seattle with her husband. Elgin Branch is a tech visionary who works at Microsoft. There is a lot of very funny Microsoft humor in this book. I don't know Maria Semple's history with Microsoft, but she seems very familiar with just internal Microsoft communications and language and all of the dumb cultural things at Microsoft that make them so mockable. So that's also a fun thing about this book. So anyhow, Bernadette vanishes at some point. A lot of the book's drive is through wondering, well, how did it happen? And then what happened to her? And is she okay? And are we going to find her again? So that kind of keeps you going. But over time, the book, it becomes clear that the title is kind of a double meaning. It's both what happened when Bernadette went missing, but also what happened to Bernadette after they moved to Seattle, and kind of how can specifically a woman lose herself in marriage and motherhood and kind of lose track of who she was. And that is something that has happened to Bernadette and then is the reason that she has gone missing. It kind of goes in some really surprising directions that I found really delightful, like characters that I found really hateable wound up kind of turning around and surprising me by doing the right thing.
By becoming Mercedes parents.
Right. Or maybe realizing that becoming a Mercedes parent isn't the most important thing. But I hadn't read a book that was almost entirely epistolary in this way in a long time. It makes it so readable because you just feel like you're reading through people's emails. It just doesn't hold you in one place for very long. So you're like, well, I'll just read another email because, oh, this weirdo is going again. Let's see what he said. Oh, interesting. An FBI report. Okay, well, what does that mean? And you kind of just keep going. But I really just found it to be charming and funny and ultimately really lovely book. My final thought on it is that it is also very 2012 in a way that I found really interesting and enjoyable. It is a time right before everything changed. It feels like it's about a different world, especially because it's about tech. It's about the Pacific Northwest and Seattle and Microsoft and, the rise of the iPod. There are mentions of Apple technology and the conflict between Microsoft and Apple, which was still seen as a thing in 2012. And it just reflects how much has changed. Social media is barely even present. And just the world was so different. The idea of a tech mogul was so different. Someone having a really successful TED Talk was still something you would talk about and that people would see as, worthy of their envy. So it's really a snapshot of a moment in time that still feels timeless. I still found it very relatable. And also it was a little bit nostalgic, and it took me back in a way that I at least enjoyed, because I was, around in 2012 and sort of aware of what the world was like. So I really recommend it. I mean, if you just want a book that will whisk you away for a day and make you laugh and laugh and laugh, read this one. That's Where'd You Go, Bernadette by Maria Semple.
Too bad you can't really write an epistolary novel with TikToks. I don't know if that would work in the novel form.
Could
It'd
make
have
a
to be a
movie
movie,
like
I guess.
that, though.
Surely that's already been done, like a horror movie. Haven't they made horror movies that are all on Twitch or something?
American Vandal comes pretty close to that.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah, documentaries.
Well, it's documentary, but a lot of it is told through the social media clips of the people
I
sharing their Instagrams and stuff.
That the documentary format lends itself to that kind of storytelling just naturally.
My Warmer Thing is also a relic of another era. It is a TV show called How I Met Your Mother, which I enjoyed quite a bit when it was on and decided to rewatch as kind of a background watching thing while I'm playing a video game on my Steam Deck called Mugenics that I'm obsessed with, and we will talk about more next week. So on a whim, I just started watching it, and it's still really funny. It holds up pretty well. Still a good show. I think that's something that so How I Met Your Mother, just to describe it for people, is a show where the narrative framing is that it is set in the year 2030, and a guy named Ted Mosby, who is voiced by Bob Saget, is telling his kids the story of how he met their mother. And so it goes back in time, starting in 2006, which is when the first season of the show aired. And then the kind of the back in time part, which is most of the show, almost all of the show, is it goes in year by year order, kind of like loosely corresponding with when the show actually aired. So it'll be like from 2006 until, 2012 or whenever the show stopped airing, 2014 or something like that. And so the show is told, it's a story of these five friends. Ted, who is not actually played by Bob Saget, just voiced by Bob Saget in the future, and his buddies Barney, played by Neil Patrick Harris, and Robin Scherbatsky, and Marshall and Lily Erickson, and their interactions in New York City. They start off the show like in their late 20s, wind up in their early 30s as the show goes on. And it's all about their dating lives and their relationships and their friendships and ridiculous things happening to them in New York. And it's a very entertaining watch because the characters are very good and the performances are very good and the writing is very sharp and the jokes are very funny still to this day. A couple of things have not aged well. There are a few trans jokes that I think do not hold up. Maybe were seen as okay then, would not be seen as okay today. A few kind of like jokes in that nature. But for the most part, I think it holds up pretty well. Barney's character is also this kind of like ridiculous, like Lothario type pickup artist type.
It's like an iconic performance by Neil Patrick
It
Harris.
is. And I was like, man, is this going to feel gross? Is he going to be like
he's
super,
so
like
good
he's so
at
sleazy.
He's
so good at it,
incredible.
Maddy. And also, a lot of the time he's the butt of the joke, which I think helps a lot. There are some moments where it's like, oh my God, we're getting a laugh out of him, like totally mistreating this poor woman, and like him just like we're supposed to be rooting for him along the way. And so there are a few parts that are a little bit like icky, but it's not ruining the show for me. Like I still am enjoying watching it. And it's a very good comfort watch. It makes you miss the days, or it makes me miss the days of like these sitcoms that were just on and you just hang out with your TV friends for 25 minutes and then forget about them until the next week. And How I Met Your Mother, also, unlike some of the other sitcoms of the early 2000s/90s, is very heavily serialized, and there are a lot of like ongoing storylines, and they play around with time in a really fun way. Like sometimes it'll be 2007, so season 2 of the show, and Ted in the future will be like, oh yeah, and then there was the goat, and you'll just see a goat in their bathroom, and he'll be like, oh, but that was actually next year, and then you don't find out about it until a year later in season 3, and then it's like, oh, I gotta tell you kids about the story of the goat. And they play around with like the form in some really fun ways. At one point, Robin is dating a guy, and Ted is like, he probably looked like this, and it shows a guy who's maybe like in his late 30s and like handsome and grizzled, and then Ted goes, but to me it looked like this, and it just shows a guy in his 80s, and like the entire episode is like Robin dating this guy who's in his 80s, and it's just played for a lot of good laughs, and yeah, it's a very funny show, and it still holds up really well, in a way that I'm sure a lot of sitcoms do not. So I've been enjoying rewatching it. It's been fun.
I think because you're talking about this show right now, is there a way that you can share your take on the ending without spoiling it? Because I know people had a lot of takes on the ending, and this was not a show that I watched, so I'd love to know what you think.
Oh, wow. You never watched it? Okay.
No.
Yeah, I actually liked it. A lot of people didn't like it. I did. But the caveat here is that when it was airing, I didn't watch any of that final season. I just skipped ahead to the finale to see what they did for the finale. So I missed a lot of that.
You turned to the final page of the book.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of tuned out, and I'm curious. This rewatch, I'll see if I enjoy like seasons 8 and 9. I
also fell off of those. I think that was a pretty common experience at the time.
Yeah, it got a little, I don't know, bad, I suppose. As is often the case with these long-running sitcoms, like you have the bad
9
moments,
seasons,
right?
Yeah,
it's so much TV.
That quality.
Even now, the first 2 seasons, especially the first season, like are a huge leap in quality over like season 3 was a little bit worse. Season 4 was a little bit worse. So even at the beginning, I think the first 2 seasons were hard to top, I would say. In that it feels like they just threw all of their true experiences of living in New York and ridiculous stories that had happened to them. And then after that, they had to go into, I don't know, more outlandish territory or more kind of silly and tense moments with the characters because maybe they ran out of those fun stories that they had. I don't know. That's me just kind of hypothesizing. But Kirk, to answer your question, so I didn't really watch the last season, but I skipped to the ending and I actually liked it. I won't spoil it in case people out there want to watch it, but I like the way that it made the show kind of come full circle and make more sense than, I don't know. I liked it. I thought it was executed well.
Well, now that I know that you watched it, Maddy, in the same vein, what did you think of the ending?
I mean, I'll admit I didn't think it worked, but I also didn't super care, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like because the show is a sitcom, the fact that the premise and the title of the show is How I Met Your Mother actually ended up kind of dragging the show down. Like they had to stick with that. But like Jason said, what's funny about the show is like the situational comedy, what sitcom is short for. And like to just have a group of friends getting into wacky hijinks is like, those are the strongest parts of the show. And the fact that it all had to like eventually be winding up for an ending, I think would always be anticlimactic. And I found it to be, but I don't see that as a flaw, if that makes sense. I see that as an inevitability of the structure of the show.
Interesting. Okay, maybe I'll watch it one day. I've thought about it. I know it's really funny.
Do you know what? Oh, you haven't watched the show at all.
Oh, so
I've
maybe
read
you
enough times.
You probably don't even know the ending.
I have spoiled myself.
Oh, okay.
I have spoiled myself on the ending, but the thing is, if you haven't watched the show and have no
It's
context,
meaningless.
it just goes in one ear and out the other. I couldn't tell you right now, who the mother is or whatever.
Yeah, you should watch the first couple
Maybe
seasons.
I would watch the first couple seasons and then just skip to the ending. Just
Honestly,
watch the finale.
That's not a bad way to go. I remember
Just
it's
based
nice
on what
to
you're
hear
both
it
saying.
holds up. I remember really enjoying it a lot at the time and thinking it was quite funny.
Yeah, you should watch the first 2 seasons, see what you think. It's a very easy watch. It goes down easy. Like I said, you just have to stomach a couple of jokes where you're like, oh, that's bad. But like, those are few and far between.
But that's every show from the 2000s, though. Like, I'm not even going to recommend this, but Dean and I have been watching CSI, and it's my first time ever watching the first CSI.
Oh, God.
And like, there's a lot of episodes, especially with like queer characters, where we're just like, well, this one was terrible. We just like click the next button, and it's like, oh, this one's great, So like, that's just true of any show from that time period, sadly.
I'd be curious to see what you think, Kirk. the pilot is very strong. If you watch the pilot, I think you'll be hooked.
Yeah, it's been fun. I've been enjoying having half-hour comedies. We've been rewatching like Dairy Girls and starting other shows. It's nice to have just a short show that's really funny.
Yes,
and
agreed.
And also that one's a big. I mean, How I Met Your Mother is such a cultural reference point. It'd be worth watching for that alone.
There's a lot of just fun creations that they have, lingo that they come up with, and there's some very good stuff in there. All right, that is that for this week's episode. Kirk, Maddy, I'll see you both next time.
Yeah, see you both next time.
Bye.
Triple Click is produced by Jason Schreier, Maddy Myers, and me, Kirk Hamilton. I edit and mix the show and also wrote our theme music. Our show art is by Tom DJ. Some of the games and products we talked about on this episode may have been sent to us for free for review consideration. You can find a link to our ethics policy in the show notes. Triple Click is a proud member of the Maximum Fun Podcast Network, and if you like our show, we hope you'll consider supporting us by becoming a member at MaximumFun.org/join. Email us at tripleclick@MaximumFun.org and find links to our merch store and our Discord server in the show notes. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Maximum Fun,
a worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows.
Supported
directly
by you.